The old police chief sat at his desk, the incessant ticking of the clock on the wall driving into his skull like a jackhammer. He rubbed his temples, trying to soothe the dull ache building behind his eyes. Moments of peace and quiet were a rarity these days. There was always something demanding his attention. As if on cue, the shrill voice of his secretary Aaron blared over the intercom. "Chief Grady, sir. There's a woman here to see you. She says it's urgent. Something about her husband going missing." Chief Everett Grady sighed heavily. Missing persons cases were all too common lately. "Send her in, Aaron." A moment later, the door to his office swung open and a diminutive woman strode in. Her skin pallid, her dark hair cascading down her back nearly to her knees. Despite her small stature, barely over 5 feet, her presence filled the room, her bearing regal and imposing. She fixed the chief with a piercing stare. "Name?" Grady asked gruffly. The woman shook her head impatiently. "There's no time for formalities, Chief Grady. My husband, Harold, is missing. I need you to find him immediately." Her voice was low and stern. Grady held up a hand. "Ma'am, I understand you're distraught, but I need some information if I'm going to help locate your husband. When and where did you last see him? Does he have any distinguishing features or—" The woman cut him off by thrusting her hand forward, shoving something small and metallic into his palm. "This is all you need." Grady looked down to see an antique locket resting in his weathered hand. He pried it open gently. Inside was a faded black and white photo of a handsome man with a perfectly coiffed pompadour standing next to a tractor. The man had his arm around the shoulders of a petite woman in a gingham dress, clearly a much younger version of the woman standing before him now. "This is your husband?" Grady asked. The woman nodded curtly, then spun on her heel and marched toward the door without another word. "Wait!" Grady called after her. "I need more to go on. A last known location, a description. Mrs. What did you say your name was?" But she was already gone, the office door slamming shut behind her with an ominous thud. Grady slumped back in his chair, turning the locket over in his hands. Something about the photo stirred a flicker of recognition in the back of his mind, but he couldn't quite place it. With a weary sigh, he tossed the locket on his desk. As strange as the woman's behavior was, he couldn't pursue a missing persons case with such scant information. The locket sat there mocking him for the rest of the day as he tried to focus on the mountain of paperwork demanding his attention. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman's haunting stare and the cryptic locket. It was nearly 9 o'clock that night when Grady finally gave up and started packing his briefcase to head home. A ping from his computer made him pause. He glanced at the screen to see a new email, likely another tedious memo from the higher-ups. But the subject line made him do a double-take. "Half-off pumpkins at Whispering Pines Family Farm. Since when did he get on the mailing list for a pumpkin patch?" He moved to delete the message, but something made him hesitate, his cursor hovering over the trashcan icon. He felt an odd compulsion to open it. The body of the email contained little more than the advertisement's headline and an address for the farm. But it was the image at the bottom that made Grady's heart lurch in his chest. There, next to a cheerful scarecrow, was an old green tractor, the same tractor from the photo in the locket. The same tractor that had been needling the back of his brain all day. Couldn't be a coincidence. Grady had never heard of this Whispering Pines farm before, and suddenly on the same day a woman comes to him about a missing husband with nothing but a locket containing a photo of that very same tractor? Grady didn't believe in fate, but he knew he couldn't ignore this lead, slim as it might be. He scribbled down the address, grabbed the locket, and raced out of the station to his car. If he hurried, he could make it out to the farm before it got too late. An hour later, Chief Grady found himself bumping down a dirt road cutting through dense forest, branches scraping the sides of his sedan. He squinted through the darkness, trying to make out any landmarks. Just as he was beginning to think he was hopelessly lost, the woods suddenly gave way to an open field illuminated by the rising full moon. In the middle of the field sat a cheerful red barn, strings of fairy lights twinkling along its eaves. Grady pulled up next to a row of hay bales and parked. He stepped out into the cool October air, shivering slightly in his thin jacket. The only sound was the chirping of crickets and the crunch of dry leaves beneath his feet as he made his way toward the barn. "Hello? Is anyone here?" Grady called out as he approached. A rustling came from inside the barn, and a moment later a hunched figure emerged, a hoe clutched in gnarled fingers. The man was ancient, his skin like cracked leather, his back stooped with age. He fixed Grady with clouded eyes, regarding him suspiciously. "The farm's closed, son. What you doing here at this hour?" Grady held up the locket. "I'm Chief Grady with the Milford Police. I'm investigating the disappearance of this man, Harold." "I'm sorry, I didn't catch his last name. His wife came to me for help, and this locket was the only clue she gave me. I don't suppose you recognize the couple in this photo." He opened the locket and held it out. The old man squinted at it. Then his eyes flew wide and he stumbled back a step. "Where'd you get that?" "Like I said, from the missing man's wife." "Do you know him?" The man shook his head vehemently, backing away. No. I don't know nothing about no missing man. You best be on your way now, Chief." "Sir, if you have any information that could help." "I said get out." The old man roared with surprising ferocity. He brandished his hoe like a weapon. "Get off my land afore I call the sheriff." Grady held up his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "All right, I'm going. No need for that. But if you think of anything that could help, here's my card. This man's wife is desperate to find him." He placed his business card on a hay bale, then turned and walked briskly back to his car. Once inside, he let out a shaky breath. The old farmer's reaction had caught him completely off guard. He was definitely hiding something. But what? As Grady pulled back onto the main road, he resolved to dig deeper into the identity of the man in the locket. If he could just get a last name, he could run a missing persons check, see if this Harold character had any priors. Maybe that would shine a light on why he disappeared and why his wife was being so cagey. The next morning, Grady arrived at the station before dawn. He powered up his ancient desktop computer, drumming his fingers impatiently as it wheezed and churned. Finally, the search database blinked to life on the screen. Grady realized he still didn't have a last name for either Harold or his wife. He racked his brain, trying to recall any details from his encounter with the woman. He could picture her somewhat unsettling stare, her cascading dark hair, her antique locket. The locket, of course. It had been personalized with a cursive inscription. "To J.H. Love always, H.H." Grady plugged the initials into the database for missing persons in his county going back 20 years. He held his breath as the computer searched, expecting it to return empty. Instead, a single result popped up: Harvest, Harold. Last seen, October 13th, 1962. Status, presumed dead. Grady blinked at the screen. 1962? That was over 60 years ago. Couldn't be the same Harold. He would have to be in his late 80s at least. And presumed dead? What had happened? He clicked on the file. A black and white photo of a handsome man with a familiar pompadour hairstyle stared back at him. It was undoubtedly the same man from the locket photo. Only according to this, he'd gone missing before Grady was even born. Confused, Grady scanned the file. Harold Harvest, owner of Harvest Family Farm, was reported missing by his wife Jenna Harvest on October 13, 1962. Extensive searches of the property turned up no sign of him. Interviews with family members and farmhands suggested things had been tense between Harold and Jenna in the months leading up to his disappearance, with multiple heated arguments overheard. When Jenna couldn't keep up with the mortgage on her own, the bank foreclosed on the farm. It was purchased by another family and renamed Whispering Pines. The trail on Harold's case went cold, and after 7 years, he was declared legally dead. Jenna was the prime suspect, but no evidence could tie her to his disappearance. She withdrew from the public eye and died a few years later of unknown causes. Grady sat back in his chair, mind reeling. What was going on here? Was the woman who came to him claiming to be Jenna some sick prankster or imposter? Why dredge up a 60-year-old cold case? And that old farmer's reaction to the locket? He must know more than he was letting on. Grady had to find out. He drove back out to Whispering Pines Farm that evening, armed with the new information. The sun was just starting to set as he pulled up to the barn and parked. This time, a younger woman emerged from the house adjacent to the barn. She was in her 30s with strawberry blonde hair pulled back in a bandana. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyeing Grady warily. He flashed his badge. "Chief Grady, Milford PD. I need to ask you some questions about Harold Harvest." Her eyes narrowed. "Why? What's this about?" Grady held up the locket. "His wife, or someone claiming to be her, came to me saying he was missing. Only I looked into it, and records show Harold Harvest disappeared in 1962 and is long dead. You know anything about that?" The woman paled and took a step back. I don't know what you're talking about. You need to leave." "Ma'am, I think you do know. That was your grandfather, wasn't it? The farm was in your family before you lost it when he vanished." "What aren't you telling me?" She shook her head, backing toward the house. "Please just go. Leave it alone." "I can't do that. If you're in some kind of trouble, if someone is threatening you, I can help. But I need to know the truth." "The truth?" She let out a shrill, desperate laugh. "You want the truth, Chief? The truth is my grandfather killed my grandmother. He buried her body out in the pumpkin patch and then took off. The only reason he was never charged is because they never found him either." Grady's blood ran cold. "What? How do you know this?" Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "Because my father saw it happen. He was only a boy at the time. Grandpa Harold came at Grandma with an axe, screaming about her cheating on him. Said if he couldn't have her, no one could. After it was over, he turned to my dad and said he'd kill him too if he ever told anyone. Dad was traumatized, never got over it. Started drinking heavily as he got older, became abusive. He only told me what really happened when he was on his deathbed last year." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I wanted to tell someone, but I was afraid. Afraid of stirring up the past. Afraid of what it would do to the farm's reputation. Afraid that maybe Grandpa is still out there somewhere." Grady's detective instincts kicked into high gear. "What do you mean? You think your grandfather is still alive?" "I don't know. I've heard things, seen things. So has my husband. Shadow figures darting between the trees. Tools missing and then reappearing. And sometimes I swear I can hear a woman crying coming from the patch, late at night when the wind is still. I thought I was imagining it, but now..." Her eyes flicked to the locket in Grady's hand and she swallowed hard. "It's not possible. It's just not possible." Grady looked down at the locket, a chill racing up his spine. Suddenly, the woman Jenna's odd behavior made a horrifying kind of sense. If this poor woman's spirit was trapped here, bound to the site of her murder, reliving it, he steeled himself, meeting the granddaughter's terrified gaze. "I know how this is going to sound, but I think your grandmother's ghost came to me for help. I think she wants us to find her body so she can finally rest. We need to search the pumpkin patch." The woman let out a choked sob but eventually nodded. She retrieved 2 shovels from the barn and led Grady out to the sprawling pumpkin patch behind the house. They searched for hours beneath the light of the waning moon. The night grew colder, their breath puffing out in frosty plumes. Grady's hands were numb, blistered, his muscles burning with exhaustion, but he pressed on. He couldn't shake the feeling that Jenna was there with them, watching, waiting. Just when he was about to suggest they call it a night, his shovel struck something hard a few feet down. Something that wasn't a rock. Heart hammering, he scraped the dirt away to reveal the curve of a skull, tufts of dark hair still clinging to it. He met the granddaughter's horrified gaze. They had found Jenna. Grady radioed for a forensic team while the granddaughter wept quietly a few feet away. Though it had been 6 decades, the evidence was remarkably well preserved. Fragments of a nightgown, broken hoops from a petticoat, shoes, and buried a bit further away, something far more significant, the rusted head of an old axe. Tests would confirm it held traces of both Jenna and Harold's blood. It took months more of investigation, but Grady and his team eventually pieced together what had happened that fateful night in 1962. In a jealous rage, Harold had murdered his wife, buried her in the patch, and then fled. Whether he met with his own foul play by her angry spirit or human forces, they never discovered. But Jenna was finally given a proper resting place next to her long-dead parents. The granddaughter sold the farm not long after, unable to bear the weight of its dark secrets. It passed to another family, and Grady never had reason to return. But sometimes, on cool October nights when the moon is full, the new owners say they still hear the crunch of old work boots in the pumpkin patch and catch the flash of a gingham dress darting between the leaves. The ghost of a woman forever searching for her killer. They say if you listen closely, you'll hear her mournful cry, "Harold, why? Why?"